Here are 3 true scary stories from Reddit. The links to the stories are in the description below. Enjoy. Number 1. I've been hesitant to post this because I thought that maybe I was looking too much into things. But after I discovered something last night, I'm really worried. I'm going to preface this by saying that I have not yet gone to the police, because I have a lot of people telling me that I'm being paranoid. It all started about 6 months ago. I was selling my truck to get a car. I was cleaning out the back of the truck and throwing tools on the ground in front of my apartment when he came up to me, a new neighbor. His name, for the purpose of this, is Lenny. I'm a 28-year-old woman and live with my ex-boyfriend and our 3-year-old daughter. My ex and I sleep in separate rooms, but we live together for the sake of our daughter. My ex was trying really hard to get a promotion, so he's working really long hours. I feel like the fact that I am alone so often is important enough to note. Lenny seemed nice, but I could smell alcohol on his breath. It's 5 p.m. on a weekday, so I just assumed he was a drunk. He was trying to make small talk about the tools from the truck. I told him I was really busy and had a buyer coming. He then walked away. About a week later, I'd sold my truck and went to a car wash quite a ways from where I lived, and ran into Lenny there. He came up to me excited, saying, "Hey, you're the girl from my new apartment complex." He didn't smell like alcohol this time, but still seemed a little off, like he was way too excited to see me there. Once again, I made small talk and told him I was busy and went on my way. Over the next few months, I started running into Lenny everywhere, which is weird because I hardly leave my apartment. It seemed like every time I left to run errands, I'd bump into him. At the mall, at Walmart, places like that. And every time he'd be very excited to see me. Honestly, I never thought anything of it, until recent events. A few weeks ago, I got a knock on my door at 10 a.m. I opened my door because at the time I thought, oh, here's a neighbor who probably wants something neighborly, like sugar or something like that. This is when things got strange. I opened the door to see Lenny standing there, then he immediately tried to come inside. My coat and shoes were next to the door, so I pushed him back and said we could talk outside. I put on the coat and shoes and asked what he wanted. He said he was lonely and wanted to talk. I told him the truth, which was I had a little fender bender the night before and was about to call the insurance company, that I couldn't really chat. I even took him to the car and showed him the dent. That turned out to be a mistake. He was more forward than I had ever seen him in those past 6 months. He repeatedly asked me to come back to his apartment. I said, "No, I really need to call my insurance company." When he kept on persisting that I should come back to his apartment, I told him that I lived with my boyfriend and that he'd be mad if I didn't call the insurance company soon. Lenny stepped back and said, "I thought I was your boyfriend." I said, "No, I've been with my boyfriend for 6 years. I don't know why you thought I didn't have a boyfriend." I then tried to laugh it off nervously. He walked around to his car, which was parked next to mine. He opened the passenger door and said, "It's so cold out here. Why don't you get in my car?" He then tried to shuffle me in through the passenger side. I pulled away and said that I really needed to call my insurance company and that it was nice talking to him, and pretty much ran inside. When inside, I texted some friends the story and asked if I was being paranoid. Notably, the female said no. The guys I texted said yes. I still wasn't sure about everything. Then I really started thinking about Lenny. Questions came to my mind that I had never thought of until now. Like, how did he know I was home alone? He tried to walk in there like there wasn't anybody here besides me to stop him. Also, I live in a town with around 100,000 people, so how did he manage to run into me the one time a month I went to the mall? Literally every time that I went, he was always there. He was at Walmart the one time a week I would go shopping. And another time I went to a Walmart in another town and he was there. How could I be so blind? I should have seen this sooner. It just got to the point where I'd see him and internally go, "Oh God, this guy again." Just start thinking of excuses of why you can't chat with him. And I was alone every time. I assumed that's why he thought I didn't have a boyfriend. I remember there were times I was talking to friends outside and he'd be there. And every time a car drove by, he'd point and alarmingly say, "Is that your boyfriend?" And then turn back to talking to me. It just seemed odd. I remember he once told me that he lived with a woman in his apartment. So I checked the voter registration for the address. I found her name registered there, but not Lenny's. I actually didn't know Lenny's last name. I couldn't find any kind of arrest record, or really any type of record on this guy at all. So I pushed it out of my mind. Last night, a friend was over asking me about the whole thing. I mentioned that my ex laughed at me when I drew the blinds at night. He said all my run-ins with Lenny were nothing more than a coincidence, and that I was just being paranoid. The friend started asking me about the girl that lived with Lenny. I didn't know much about her, just her name. My friend said I should look her up on Facebook. I might be able to look through her friends list and find Lenny's last name there. Well, I got on Facebook and discovered something that creeped me out more than anything. I recognized her. She's been to my door, not once, but twice. Both times she's knocked, and when I opened the door, she looked in and said, "Oh, I must have the wrong apartment." I thought it was strange to have seen her twice. The thing is, why would she come to my door when she lives around the building? Maybe once I could see, but not twice. She knew damn well where her apartment was. With this, I started to remember even more details about seeing this woman before. I always saw her outside my apartment. She's a very pretty black girl with the brightest blue eyes. Trust me when I say she stands out. I can't help but think that Lenny put her up to coming to my door, that he has her watching me. I'm legitimately scared of Lenny now. I know that the police would just have a talk with him at most if I reported any of this. I'm afraid of making him angry. My friends want me to go and at least talk to the apartment manager, but I know it'll be the same thing. I don't want them going to him saying that I've complained about how creepy he is. Not too long ago, someone came to the door. I was home with my daughter and my ex was in his room. I then saw the doorknob to the front door slowly being turned. Then there was a violent rattling of the doorknob. I grabbed my daughter and went in to get my ex out of his room. He and I ran outside together. We both saw Lenny's car speeding off. Amazingly, even after this, my ex still thinks I'm being paranoid. But he does make sure to lock the door now when he leaves for work. Since then, my daughter has pointed at the window during the night and said, "Look, monster at the window." That really creeps me out. We have cats, so the blinds are a bit bent, and it is possible to see inside. Number 2. I moved to a new large city days after turning 21. I was naive and thought that people were nice and cared too much about other people's feelings. I have since learned my lesson. The building I moved into was super nice and actually had a continental breakfast during the week. One of the first few days after moving in, I got off the elevator and headed to the breakfast lounge. As I exited, I did a double take of a guy passing me. I turned around to catch a second glance, as did he. My double take was because he was surprisingly tall, at least 6'6". I now understand that my glance possibly gave him the idea that I was attracted to him. Minutes later, he sat down at the main table near me and struck up a conversation. He seemed pretty nice. He asked for my contact information. Considering I was 21 and he looked of a man in his 40s, I thought of it as a friendly gesture and had no issues giving him my phone number and email. Yes, I was naive. The breakfast encounters continued. He was charismatic and a little bit of a hippie, but very outgoing and friendly. He told me he knew a relatively famous girl who happened to also be a good friend of one of my close friends. He said that she was going to a restaurant opening with him and invited me to come along. I agreed. Turns out, the girl had met him once and were not as close as he led me to believe. She actually thought he was a creep. However, I didn't know this at the time. Needless to say, when I showed up to the restaurant opening, he told me that she couldn't make it. Let me remind you, I had just turned 21 and had not yet learned how to pace my drinking. I ate many samples from many silver trays and drank too much champagne, but still had a good time. Since we lived in the same building, we shared a cab ride home. He ended up convincing me to go to a bar across the street, and by that time, I was wasted. Afterwards, he somehow convinced me in coming back to his apartment, and I ended up sleeping with him, mainly because I was too worried about hurting his feelings and hadn't really learned how to say no yet. I was so drunk I hardly remember the ordeal, and rushed out afterwards and decided I would avoid him at all costs. I texted him the next day and told him I wasn't ready to be in a relationship. I also changed the time that I went to go get breakfast, as to avoid running into him. Well, he ended up figuring out my schedule and would just so happen to be standing outside with his friend who was a smoker every single day when I got home. He would then get in the elevator with me and continuously invite me to do different things: yoga, acupuncture, hiking, etc. These invites didn't stop no matter how many excuses I came up with. I again told him that I wasn't ready for a relationship at the time. He would reply, "No, we'll just go as friends." He was always standing outside when I left the building, and I always told him that I was running late for something. If he didn't see me in person, he would text me. When I ignored his text, he would email me. One day, we both got in the elevator. He had waited for me again, and he didn't get off on his floor. Instead, he rode the elevator up to mine. I went in the opposite direction of my apartment, and when he tried talking to me, I told him I had to make a very important phone call. He left. At this point, I knew I should have been more blunt. I thought the excuses would eventually give him a hint. What should I have done? Should I have told him to leave me alone because he made me feel uncomfortable? But what did I do? I instead told him that I was a victim of a sexual assault and had PTSD. I wasn't in a comfortable space to be alone with any guy. This was actually true. I thought this would guilt him away from the invites. Instead, he kept telling me that I needed to get over my fears and to stop being a victim, etc., etc. Oh, I neglected to mention that I also work as a model, and he had followed me down the street one day after leaving the apartment building. He told me he ran a video production company and was working on pitching a pilot and would love to shoot some videos with me. In the beginning, I thought this would have been cool. Later, I wanted nothing to do with the idea. After 4 to 5 months of this guy freaking me out, his invites started to lull down a bit. Maybe because it was winter and it would be too cold to wait outside. 7 months after our initial contact, I got a random text from him out of the blue. That made my stomach drop. It read, "I miss seeing those sexy legs," along with a photo he had secretly taken of my legs and feet when I was wearing a dress in the elevator. This was the push I needed to stop being nice. Before immediately ripping him a new one, I did some Google research. I wanted to see if I could find a mugshot or any arrest records. However, I didn't know his last name. So instead, I Googled his email address, hoping that it would lead me to his full name. What I found out told me even more. I found a database that showed his email address was registered to the manager of a really low-budget porn website. I texted him and went off about how awful it was for him to secretly photograph me. I told him to delete my number and never text me again. If you see me, do not even make eye contact with me. Do not speak to me. Do not try to apologize. We are strangers. Oh, and by the way, I know you run a porn website. He sent back a text saying that he only managed the website. He then proceeded to go on a long rant about my drug problem and how concerned he was. I take Wellbutrin to help manage my PTSD. I repeated for him to delete my number and never speak to me again. After a year, I moved out of the building. 3 years later, last March, I moved into another large building only a block away from my old one. I was cautious and worried about running into him on the street. Instead, on my second day there, as I'm working out in the building's gym, a tall man approached me. "Excuse me, but are you?" "Yes, and I'm very uncomfortable right now. Please go." He told me how he didn't recognize me, and I repeated, "I am very uncomfortable. I am very uncomfortable," over and over and over again. He apologized and left. He texted me later saying that he didn't recognize me because I had lost so much weight. Well, I weighed the same. I just couldn't believe that I had moved into his new building. I told him again to delete my number, not to contact me. A few days ago, I received a text from him asking how I was and that he had passed me in the street. I finally did what I should have done a long time ago. I sent him a long, nasty text explaining that I need to be blunt because he obviously wasn't getting the hint. I never wanted to be your friend, I won't change my mind, and that you freaked me out. He texted back saying that he knew my response was because I was a victim and that I needed to remember that he wasn't my attacker. This set me off. I told him, "No, it's because you're a creep. I only told you about that because all of my excuses weren't getting the point across to you." I said that I knew how he arranged his schedule around me and that it freaked me out about how obsessive he was, that I severely regretted not speaking up when going back to his apartment. He responded by saying he's had more sex with women than 1,000 men would be capable of. I explained that he reminded me of a time in my life I'm not proud of, and finally got him to agree to ignore me and pretend that we're complete strangers. Hopefully, he actually deleted my number this time. Who knows? Since we're strangers, creepy porn guy, let's not meet. Number 3. I'm a 24-year-old guy, and this happened to me about 6 months ago. I live in a rather large apartment complex, one that is very open and social. People are always outside waving to each other, having drinks and barbecues, stuff like that. It's quite a safe place, with people looking out for each other all the time, and if anything happens, everyone is usually in the know. Anyway, I live on the upper floor of my building, very close to the roof. In fact, there's a door near my place that opens to stairs leading up to it, so it isn't hard to get up there. I personally have been up there once before, but after what happened recently, I don't ever plan on going up there alone again. It was around 8 p.m., and I was on my computer checking my email, as well as just relaxing and browsing different sites. At that moment, my internet decides to up and shit itself. Now, this is pretty common, as I use the building's Wi-Fi and it does this at certain points. This would be okay, but I was reading 3 important emails and couldn't check the other 2 at the time because I hadn't opened them in any other tabs. So I decided I was going to head outside and walk to another building that some friends lived in. They're really nice about letting me use their Wi-Fi when things like this happen. I walk out into the hallway and lock my door when I hear a thump from the roof. This didn't surprise me that much though. It was probably someone up there drinking or hanging out. Sometimes it happens. I get to the bottom of the stairs and walk out the front of the building when I hear a loud rattle come from the roof. I look up and I don't see anything. I brush it off as a random person up there who tripped and fell or something like that. I continue walking, and a few minutes later, as I'm nearing my friend's building, I hear a nearby bush shake. I'm getting a little weirded out at this point, but dismiss it as a cat or lizard moving around in it, and just keep walking. I arrive at their building and sit down on the curb near the entrance. I pull out my phone, unlock it, and go to my email, and continue where I left off. A few minutes into reading, I hear another rattle, just like in my building, only now it's here. I'm getting an increasingly bad feeling, but keep telling myself it's nothing. About 5 minutes later, I happen to look up at the roof and get startled. There's a guy crouching near the ledge peering down at me. I figure he's just enjoying the view of the place and just happened to be looking down at me when I looked up. I shine the light from my phone at him, and I can make out more details. He's wearing tattered pants, a black hoodie, and a mask. One of those white masks you buy at a party store, and on it is drawn a really large smile. This creeped me out for a moment, but again I give myself an excuse to brush it off. I laugh nervously at the guy and just go back to reading. I look up a few minutes later, and the guy is sticking his head over the ledge even more. I'm starting to get scared now, and this is beginning to feel like some horror movie. It was just me and this guy out there, and I really didn't know what the hell he wanted, so I decided to get up and just walk back to my place. I get back with no trouble, and start laughing by the time I reach the door, thinking about how silly I was. The guy was probably some prankster trying to scare me or something. So I'm in a good mood walking through the entrance when I look up and immediately feel all my blood drain away. That same damn guy is there, on my roof, staring down at me. I figure he must have run over when I left and gotten on top of the roof before I got here. So I just stand there, frozen for a moment, and this guy tilts his head as if wondering what's wrong. I quickly head inside and try to forget it. I enter my place and lock the door. Late into the night, I laid in my bed trying to get to sleep. I finally was sleepy enough and shut my eyes, when a little while later, I hear tapping on my window near the balcony. With my heart racing, I get up to investigate the noise. I go to my balcony's glass door and pull back the curtain and immediately scream. The guy is hanging from the roof, staring at me upside down. He tilts his head and I stand there frozen, screaming, wondering where the hell this psychopath came from. He drops down onto the balcony and knocks on the glass door to be let in. When I don't comply, he starts banging. This escalates until he rams into the glass full force, cracking it. By this time, I'm scrambling backwards across the floor and jump up to unlock my door and get the hell out of there. As I exit into the hallway, I hear the glass shatter. I shut the door, run down the hall and start banging on a neighbor's door. I look back at my place and see the door open, and Roofman peeks out. At this moment, the neighbor answers and looks at me worried. I point down the hall and Roofman is standing there, staring us down. He suddenly breaks into a full sprint, running at us all crazy. My neighbor pulls me into his place and slams the door. A couple seconds after, we feel the loud banging against his door. We look out of the peephole and see he's relentlessly ramming the door. He gets on the phone and calls the cops. The door holds up, and after a while, he gives up and runs off. The cops searched the entire complex, but he was gone. I don't know what scares me more, that awful, horrific night, or knowing that he's still out there, and he could do this to me again. My neighbor kindly allowed me to stay at his place for a while, saying he understood and that if something like that happened again, he'd have my back. I can't thank him enough. So now, here I sit, still in my neighbor's place, relaxing and watching TV, and I haven't seen the psychopath since that night, 6 months ago. Thank God. So Roofman, let's never, ever meet again. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed. Until next time.